Hi, I'm Tom. Isn't that better? A little energy to finish the afternoon here on Wednesday at Microsoft Ignite. So, I put together a little talk that I call SQL Server Default Configurations, helping good people make better choices. Not really the original title. I was going to go for something a little more negative, but that's all right. I like it anyway, because what I find is that configuration choices actually have a lot of impact onto the performance aspect of our job, performance tuning aspect of our job as database administrators. And I've already asked, and most of us here are database administrators, yay, us. We know that the first thing we want to do is blame the network, just because it buys us some time, but we also know that there are a lot of things under our control, including default configuration. So let's jump in a little bit. Within the past year, there was an email that went out to the Microsoft Data Platform MVP list. And it was Microsoft asking a very simple question. Tell us what are the top issues you're seeing out there with SQL Server. Okay? So the responses came back. And as they were coming back, I realized I should put them all in an Excel spreadsheet and put them into buckets and figure out what are the biggest buckets for performance problems with SQL Server. So that's what I did. So there's about 400 data platform MVPs. A good number responded or simply responded with a +1 to somebody else's email. So I thought I had a pretty decent sample size. And we're going to go through these in no particular order. Indexes. Indexes. So anybody here ever just rebuilt an index and have a performance problem just magically go away? Yes, a few hands. I got to be honest, I think a few of you are just not wanting to raise your hand for that. I'm not blaming you for this index choice. I'm just saying, you know, something went wrong. You rebuilt an index, you adjusted an index, problem went away. Does that sound right? Okay. So that was one. Indexes. Poor design decisions, right? Somebody somewhere made, I'm not going to blame the architects here in the room. I'm just going to say somebody made some decisions and they weren't necessarily correct, or they may have been correct at the time, but things have changed since. That happens a lot. Anybody here managing less data today than a year ago? No? There's more coming in every day. It doesn't really go anywhere. It just gets stored, and sometimes that affects the performance over time. All right? Bad code. Now, I'm not going to say your code is bad. Your code is great. I haven't met you, but I know your code it's the other person's code, right? That's bad code. So that was another one. ORMs. Things, Nhibernate would be an example. Just anything that is a code first generator. Who here is using code first generators? Just a couple of people. Who's here is using code first generators well? And that would be nobody. So that was yet another bucket. All these sound painfully familiar to you? All right. No, he's shaking his head. Oh, okay. Code first. I just meant in general the list. Something on that list familiar? All right, that's good. Okay, last one. Default configurations. Default configurations came up again and again and again. That's what we're going to dive into a little bit here. Default configurations over and over and over again. These MVPs are being asked to come in, troubleshoot something, and the end result is, well, you have an installation that is essentially still with the defaults. Let me change a few of these defaults for you. We're going to get some better performance. So the question becomes, how do they arrive at this default configuration being the choice? And of course, we know it could have been good at the start, but things have changed over time. Well, does anybody here know how to install SQL Server like a boss? Fully scripted like a boss? I don't think a boss scripts anything. But I do think a boss can do next, 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 finish. This is installing SQL Server like a boss. And of course he will accept those license terms. Like a boss. So this is how, I'm making fun like a boss, obviously. It's a tagline. But this is how a lot of people install SQL Server. Even your unintended installations, it can just be, just bare bones, just get it installed, and we'll make the configuration changes later, maybe. So this is probably familiar for a lot of you. This is how installations happen, and then it ends up in your lap. And so here's the thing. Here's the key takeaway. when this happens. This is not your fault, but it becomes your problem. That's where you're at. It's not your fault that somebody clicked next, finish, but it does become your problem. Well, then it's both. All right. So this is how to configure Microsoft SQL Server, how to configure SQL Server like a Microsoft Certified Master. It was a talk I put together a couple of years ago, and I walked through a handful of settings. I'm sorry, as I pace, I don't want to stand behind the podium, and I'm in your way from time to time. I apologize, but I'm going to just keep moving. I configure, and I broke it down to 3 sections. I said operating system, instance level, and database level. So 3 layers to consider when you're going through what would maybe be considered default configurations, or at least configuration options. So 1, processor options. I'm just going to run through a couple of examples, and I'm going to show you a quick demo of a tool that we have. Who here is familiar with the power plan options inside of Windows Server? Who here is painfully familiar with the power plan? Yeah, a few of you, right? So what's the default configuration for the power plan in Windows Server? What's the word? Balanced. What do you want it to be? High performance. Your database servers most likely would benefit from being on a high performance plan. However, if you go into Windows and you set that, it could be overridden by the BIOS. But that is a server operating system level default configuration choice that you need to be aware of for SQL Server. You also want to be aware of it in case you're on a host and that host is over allocated, because you may have no knowledge of that, especially in the Hyper-V environment, unless you have a tool that is showing you the connection between those and say, here's my host, here's my guest. So you need that type of information. All right. Instance configuration. Most common one, max memory. What is the max memory set to in the default configuration? 2 terabytes. Do you have a server with 2 terabytes of memory? Yeah, actually, he does. This guy's my favorite. He does. He's like, yeah, I do. And what do you set the memory to for that? Not 2 terabytes. So common myth is that SQL Server will use all the memory. Since you're all DBAs in here, I know that you know that is not true. It does not use all the memory. It will try to use nearly all the memory. It will actually only go up to 95% of the physical memory. And then it will bounce between 50% available, 95% physical. Now, of course, there are other memory regions that SQL Server may be using for things like CLR and whatnot. And of course, yes, you could be using up to 100% of the memory. But SQL Server itself, that little engine, isn't the one doing it all. So the other thing that comes up a lot is the fact that multi-instances do not talk to each other. So if you're running more than one instance of SQL Server on a server, more than one instance of SQL Server on the server, then they know nothing about each other. So if you go in there and you're just blindly saying, okay, well, I don't know, I'll set it to be max memory minus 4 gigs, and you do that for each instance, they have no knowledge of each other, you're running into memory problems. Okay. So even that's a choice there where it's not even a default choice of yours. It's not a default configuration as a next finish, but your default is to do max minus 4 gigs, and you're applying that to all those instances. That's now your default configuration that you're trying to do, but it's still not the correct one. So you got to be aware of that. Last one, compression options. Who here is using row and or page compression? 1, 2, oh, a handful of people. And is it working well for you? No, one guy's, well, the rest of you should think about it. I know plenty of people at this event, they're consultants, they get called in to troubleshoot performance. One of the first things they look at is enabling compression. They can enable compression, they can get an immediate performance boost on whatever query they were looking at, and by the end of the day, they have the contract. It's that good. It can be that good. So you should consider this as an option, right? But it's not necessarily a default configuration, but it might be a default for you to consider using when you're building out your databases and your tables. All right. Other options that we haven't really talked about. Yep. MaxStop, trying to align NUMA or vNUMA for your servers as well. TempDB has options, default file growth, disk file placement, disk configuration, backups. Default backup location, right, is the configuration option for you. All of these things are things that you need to consider. How much time do I have left? Okay, so I got 5 minutes? I don't know. When do you want me to be done? I think I'm done at 25. 12? Oh, 10 minutes. Perfect. All right. So these are all the options. And obviously, the question now becomes, how are you tracking? So we had a handful of people saying that they were tracking, they were using PowerShell. You had the system? No, somebody else had a system. You were using T-SQL. Okay. So the rest of you aren't tracking configuration changes at all right now. So if somebody changed max memory on your database server, how would you know? Besides when performance changes dramatically, how would you know? You wouldn't? Okay. You're the only one who does it. That's how you know? How about default backup location? If somebody came in, if a bad actor, if an adversary got in and decided to change the default database location, how would you know? Would you know? You're tracking it. Okay. The thing is that tracking these changes can be difficult and frustrating, especially when you go do upgrades or migrations. It's very often you will make changes at the server level. Say if you're running an application that requires maybe external files tied to the database, you need to do a handful of extra things, and then that doesn't get documented. So when you go to do an upgrade, you get a brand new server, you install all this stuff, you go, and then all of a sudden you're like, why isn't it working? Oh, right. Those 6 things that we had done before, we got to go back and do that again. They're not being tracked, they're not being documented, and then you gets frustrating for everybody, right? Well, I'm going to walk you through a couple of tools now that we have over at SolarWinds that I think is going to be of benefit. So the first thing I'm going to show you is one part of what we call Database Performance Analyzer. Oh no, cancel, just leave that screen there. So the top part is this rolling 30-day view, and what you see here, this bar, individual colors represent a specific query, and it does things aggregated by wait events. But that's not what I really want to talk about. What I want to talk about is down here. So this is a server running on a VM, and what we have is a stacked view. So these are metrics that are inside of the engine, metrics at the guest level, the host level, and the storage level. Because if I'm having a problem at the host level, how much time do I want to spend tuning a query inside the engine? She's just shaking her head. That's close to the answer. The answer is none. How much time do you want to spend tuning a query when the problem's at the host or in the storage? So maybe it's just me, but have you ever had that point in your career? You know, somebody calls first thing in the morning, you need to fix it, try to go fix it. You're spending all day on it, phone rings in the afternoon, voice on the other end says, hey, whatever you did to fix that thing, thanks, everything's working great. Now, you still haven't fixed anything yet. Does that happen to you, or is it just me? Yeah, a few people going, wow, that sounds painfully familiar. I usually say, I didn't do anything. Next time you need nothing done, think of me. But that's because the issue was in the different layer in your environment. Now, that's one aspect that I'd like to show, but here's the other one. Here's a configuration change. There was an event on the host that affected that guest, possibly. And we highlight for you. That's a configuration change. That's outside your control altogether, right? You have no idea what's going on in the virtual environment. Things got motion. Things got motion because there was an event, a disaster, something happened. They had to migrate. There's 6 new VMs running on your same host, and that's chewing up more resources, and so the performance is getting drained a little bit more. You need that insight and that knowledge, right? You need that ability to have that tracked. That's one thing. Now we've had this for years. If you're not familiar with SolarWinds Database Performance Analyzer, I mean, this has existed for years. Here's the stuff that we just built. What I have here is called Server Configuration Manager, and I've connected it to a database server, and I'm pulling out, by running a simple query. In this case, the query is I've just chosen a handful of things from sys configurations, right? I just run that, I output it to a flat file. That flat file is just sitting right there. Oops, let's log in. And that flat file has picked up these changes. So you can see here, I changed my cost threshold was 10, my max degree was 4, my max server memory was 4 gigs. The new values, I chose 73, 3, and 2. I put it back at 2 terabytes because I wanted all the memory. When I do SQL Server, I want all the memory, right? So tracking it automatically, output to a flat file, pick up all those changes, be able, now you can correlate that. So now when somebody calls you, you can be on that main page for that the summary page for that node and just sort of look at it and say, whoa, we're having a problem that started here. And by the way, there's also this alert. There was a configuration change around the time that performance started changing. Now, the other thing I have to monitor, though, not everything is in sys configurations. Yeah, we'll log in again. you could have somebody come in and make changes that were only going to be represented in the registry. So in this case, I changed the default backup directory to something else. So it gets alerted. All you have to do is point at the registry key, and it's going to say anything that happens inside there. I mean, if somebody does an upgrade. You know what else is in that registry key, by the way? This is pretty cool. I thought it was cool. Anybody ever be curious as to the uptime for a database server? If you didn't know it, it's in the registry key. I found that out the other day when I was running this. I'm like, what is it? Oh, that's right. I forgot. Uptime's inside the registry. So every time I run this, so I'm going to have to filter for that. But I thought it was cool because I bet some of you didn't know that the registry is where you can go to get the uptime for your database server. You've probably been doing it different ways, figuring out how long TempDB's been up or something like that. That's the instance. That's instance. That's right. For the instance. I want to know the uptime for the instance. That's usually the question. That's usually like, when was it last rebooted? Well, here it is in the registry key. All right. If you want to know more about tracking server configuration changes, especially for SQL Server, you should head over to the SolarWinds booth. We are roughly that way. And I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. My time here has come to a close, but I am ready for all of your questions. Yes, sir. So the question is, which enterprise applications can we monitor in addition to SQL? So the way the tool works right now is we monitor for the server mostly on the registry or flat file. So we can register anything that you're outputting to a flat file, or the registry changes as well. That's what we're going to be doing. So the agent that we have, or the way that we monitor the node itself, we're going to be pulling that information, and then we just do a diff, right? So we also have another product called Network Configuration Monitor, which is specific for, say, switches and routers and those configurations. Ooh, that's a great question. Does the tool have self-healing? So you're looking for a desired state configuration, essentially, and you want to roll back the change. The answer right now is no, but that would be a wonderful feature request. Sir. Okay. So the question is a tool to track changes inside of store procedures, code essentially, code changes. So we don't have a tool like that. You're really looking for something that does not change control, but tools that would be more of a developer focused. And that's not something that we have. However, if you wanted to, you could output your schema on a regular basis, and we could find a change, because that's how I used to do it back in the day, was doing a dump of all the store procedures to a flat file and then doing a diff manually. So you could do it, you'd be rolling your own. We don't have a tool to do that out of the box. Yes, sir.
Monitoring an always-on group and seeing which one's primary when it's switched.
Monitoring for always-on, primary, and switch and all that, that's inside of DPA natively. So you could have a look. If you come by the booth, we can talk about it. Yes.
Trying to determine MaxDOT and CTFP for an OLTP system on VM.
So you want to know what is the magic number that I should set my memory and cost threshold for parallelism to for that specific workload? That is a wonderful question. We don't have a tool to do that for you magically. That do I have insight on how I do it? Yes. If you want, you can come talk to me a little bit after. Next, sir. Across the street. So is there a way to protect a backup other than password or backup encryption? I'm sorry. I can't. So the real question is, for backup encryption, is there a way for me to automatically have the certificate go to the other server? I want to say that there is. I'm just not familiar with what it or the product that does that. But it's usually a manual process. So if you want, we can talk a little bit more about it after. Any other questions before I follow up with these two? No? All right, fill out the surveys. My favorite number's 5. And hopefully, if I've done okay, they'll invite me back next year. Thank you.